Hi, I'm Lisa Entwistle, founder of Wealthy Living and host of Wealthy Living radio show. I help open-minded, big-hearted people connect to themselves, to others and the world around them, guiding them to live a wealthy life both personally and professionally. Each fortnight I have conversations with a variety of different professionals to discuss topics that cover physical, emotional and spiritual wellness. And we discuss how our choices impact our work, our relationships and our health, and suggest ways to help you live a wealthy life. So today I have my regular quarterly wisdom chats with my beautiful guest, Dr. Natalie Martinek. Natalie is a scientist turned healer, coach, mentor and everything in between. She is full of gold and wisdom, and I look forward to these quarterly chats that we discuss a variety of personal development topics. So today we'll be discussing a topic, the topic we'll be discussing today is embracing the ego. So welcome, Natalie.
Thanks for having me, Lisa. Again, it's such a pleasure to have these chats and see where we go together.
Yeah, it's great. We never know where exactly they're going to go. We just sort of have the broad topic and explore from that place. So, yeah, let's see where today goes. I know this is a topic where a lot of people get quite confused about what is the ego and what does it mean, and is it good for us? Is it bad for us? It gets a really bad rap. I think since self-development and personal development have become so much more in the mainstream, the word comes up more. It's associated with fear often. But let's maybe start by just discussing what are the different perspectives of what ego means.
Yeah, so I think it was Freud who came up with the term ego and distinguished it from the id and the superego, which are all aspects of the self. According to Jung, it's more about the center of consciousness, thinking of the person seeing themselves as like the sun, where the world around them revolves. And it's basically the things that you sense in the world. So the way you navigate the world using your senses. It's the aspect of the self that expresses as our sensory ways. It's our instincts, the way we react to things or respond to things. So it's depending on who you talk to, there'll be so many different definitions. I'm not sure that there's an agreed definition. There's the way that I look at the ego, which is an aspect of the self that's primarily concerned with survival and self-preservation, and it will express itself in times of threat or when it perceives threat, even if there is no threat, to keep yourself safe, keep things as they are, keep maintaining control, and safety, security, stability, survival.
Okay, so that makes it sound like quite a good thing.
Yeah, we want to be, if we're here, I think majority of us want to continue being here. So the ego is like carrying out its job to make sure that we're constantly making sense of our world, and we're taking actions that keep us alive and keep us safe and fulfilled in the way that it needs to, which is we need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to have shelter, we need to have money, those kind of material, physical things. Mm. That's the concern of that aspect of ourself that can be called the ego. So it's not about making friends unless there's an opportunity there for its survival.
And would that survivalness be just the physical survival, or is that also the emotional survival?
What do you mean by emotional survival?
Well, when you say making friends, I think of, that keeps a person feeling liked or safe or comfortable or happy.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, for me, more an emotional survival.
So what you're talking about is connection.
Exactly.
So interestingly, the ego is not interested in connection. It has no feeling. It's not the part of us that feels. The feeling is that the inner world that has its own kind of consciousness, I guess, for lack of a better word, that we have this yearning to connect with each other.
Yeah.
The ego is kind of the opposite. It's part of our individuated self. It's the part of us that sees ourselves as separate from everything and everyone else. And it's the part of us that goes into competition because we believe that there isn't enough resource to go around. So we need to stake our claim. We need to get as much as we can because we don't know if we'll ever have enough of it, and it might run out one day. So when I mentioned before, the opportunity to make friends is from an opportunistic survival standpoint rather than a heartfelt connection to fulfill this kind of higher yearning to be one with everything.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So you've kind of explained, therefore, what the purpose of the ego is. The survival, of self and protection, and therefore it has a place. But it can also sabotage us in a lot of ways, or can't it? Does it?
Well, it has, like I said, it has that role for self-preservation and protection. So you think of your immune system as an aspect of the ego playing out in our physical and physiological sense, that it seeks threats. It's always on surveillance for threats and does its job to get rid of them so that we are safe, or we recover from illness when we've had viruses and infested bacteria. So in that sense, it's a positive, it's productive. Now, the ego doesn't like change. It likes things as it is because it understands its place in the world. That's how we form our identity. We do it in reference to things around us, in relation to the relationships we have, to the people we feel safe with, the people that are within our life. So when we are going through change, so moving homes, or maybe it's time to move to a different type of job, or there's the threat that your job will end, that's when the ego starts to arc up and like, oh my God, things are changing, we're out of control, we need to control. And then it can employ all these tactics to prevent the change from happening, or prevent the change from having a negative effect on ourselves. So it's anticipating threats sometimes, and bringing up self-doubt, bringing up negative behaviors that are just trying to keep us where we are. So it's the part of us that is preventing our growth and evolution. Because evolution means change. It means doing something different. It means creating new habits. It's learning, growing, expanding. Ego doesn't want that. So that aspect of the self will it uses our mind as a way to sabotage. So we'll bring out those doubts. It will start saying, who do you think you are to try this thing? You're not like them. You don't have that degree. So who are you? Those kinds of negative thoughts. It can be seen as the bully, the inner bully, the inner narcissist, the inner demanding dictator. Those are aspects of ourself that can get in the way of us evolving.
So our limited beliefs that we might have about ourselves, that's generally the ego part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so when those situations happen, and say for a person they're going through a transition or going through change, or the example that you just gave, and the ego part of themselves is playing out within themselves, is there then the possibility that because that's playing out in themselves, that's when the projection happens onto those around them, and those same qualities that are playing out for themselves, they end up projecting out on others?
Totally. So in our attempt to keep things as we are, because we all want change. Not all, but I'm speaking for myself. I like change. I'm used to it now because to me it's the inevitability in life. It's going to happen. Either go willingly or have it, pressured. But it will happen. So when we're going through change and we're not comfortable, we try to make ourselves comfortable by controlling others around us as well. So we're going to start to tell people what they're doing wrong when it's really our stuff that is inside us that's scary. And we're not acknowledging it. We don't notice it. It's about them. So we start to blame everyone around us for not creating the circumstances where we feel comfortable. They're not meeting our needs. They're not fulfilling our expectations. So we blame. And so we are further removing ourselves from those connections by pushing them away with blame. Because when you're in fear, there's a tendency to isolate, to separate, to distance. So that's how the ego does its thing to maintain its individuality instead of the push to get us to expand into, well, what else is possible here? How may I connect more with this new experience to help me expand, or new people to help me expand? So there's this thing we haven't talked about, that is this constant tension between separation and connection. So what is the aspect of the self that is responsible for pushing that connection? There's the higher self, or the higher guide, or the soul. So that aspect of ourselves. So the ego is actually a very small aspect of ourselves. There's other parts. So I'm going to talk about the soul, which is about connection, which is about love, commitment, discipline, assertiveness, peace. And so there's this tension between the war and the peaceful part of ourselves. And the soul bit will always win, but it's not a fighter. It's incredibly patient, and will know eventually when the ego will have to relent. Will eventually try all its tactics, and it won't win. And that's when you reach a surrender point where you're like, I have to give in to the situation, because not giving into it is causing a lot of suffering. So I'll just give in and surrender, and that's when the soul's like, all right, here I am, going to take over. Let's get on with this thing. Let's get you moving. Let's get us moving.
Yeah,
in the right direction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But if somebody, I mean, the soul is, as you said, very patient, and it'll wait until the ego part of ourselves has, finished trying to...
Tantruming.
Yeah, tantruming, basically, yeah. Finish trying to do everything it can, and then wait for it to tire out and go, all right, I've surrendered, take over. But the ideal is not to actually have it play out like that in our life. I mean, the ideal is that we don't let the ego sit in that driver's seat and control the circumstance or the situation until it tires. We ideally would like to, as humans, well, I would, and I'm sure most people would like to have the skills to be able to, one, recognise when the ego is in that driver's seat, and be able to, without too much fuss and without too much pain and too much challenge, remove the ego from the driver's seat and replace the driver as the soul, or the soul to become the driver.
Yeah.
So what sort of suggestions, or what sort of, what do you do, or have you been able to do, or suggest that others can do to make that process a lot quicker?
That's a few-part answer. So this aspect, this idea of needing to survive, or to protect itself, preserve itself, that this aspect called ego is fulfilling, is that we all have needs, and those needs need to be met. And the ego will employ, or the person will employ, any tactic and every tactic in order to have its needs met. So the needs are, again, safety, security, shelter, sleep, approval, acceptance, stimulation, fun, love, sex. These are basic survival needs that goes beyond eating, drinking, sleeping. So when we don't have those needs met, we will make sure that they get, if we're not able to meet them for ourselves, which is what we're supposed to do, then we will bring in everyone to make that happen. So when do we know these needs need to be met? Often we're in fear that something bad's going to happen to us because those needs are not being met currently. So fear is a guide that the ego's running the show. So rather than thinking the ego is in the driver's seat versus the soul in the driver's seat, I would think of the ego as the car itself. It is the vehicle. It is our vehicle. And the soul is the driver.
Yeah.
So sometimes the soul is like, the ego decides, no, I'm the soul. I'm the one in charge. And so it's the car without a driver doing its thing. And what happens when a car is accelerating and there's no driver in place? Well, lots of crazy shit. So eventually there will be an accident. There'll be an injury. There'll be something that happens to derail that process or to stop that process. So there will always be some sort of intervention. We just don't want it to be, harmful or hellish, but sometimes that's what happens to get us into alignment. So I'm not sure I answered the question. So fear is the guide to tell us we are the ego is running the show, because the opposite of that is love, that we feel like my needs are met. I don't really need anything. I'm okay with what I have now. There's an abundance of everything. There is no real competition because there's enough for everyone.
Yeah.
So it's that. So that's the kind of thinking we want to get ourselves into, because that's an expansive way of viewing our world rather than the limited way of viewing our world. So when we go into limitation, fear, separation, isolation, the ego is kind of driving or running the car without the driver.
Yeah. So second part of the question, so that's how we identify when the ego is running the show. But how do we shorten the gap between that, putting the soul running the show again? So how do, we your explanation helped to identify who's doing what job within ourselves, but how do we not just sit patiently until an accident happens or, all those things happen? How do you intervene earlier within yourself? How do you go from identification to actually actioning?
Yeah. So there's so many different practices. One that I use a lot because I'm kind of, I meditate in the morning and I tune into what's happening inside me. What are my feelings? I'm feeling this fear. I'm feeling this sadness. I'm feeling this grief. What's happening there? And before I start to try to unravel a story, I just feel the feeling and I send love to it. So I acknowledge it, it's part of me, that the ego is not this separate thing to me, which is what I've seen happening in the world, where it's like, oh, my ego made me do that, or they're in their ego. It's like, it's still an aspect of each of us. I need to embrace it. I need to involve it, include it, and send love to it and see it as important and necessary as all the other nice feeling things in my body or in my life. So I send love to that feeling. I send love to those thoughts. It's just like, when I see a child suffering or upset about something, I'm not going to berate her or him for feeling that way or for doing that thing. It's like, okay, what do you need? What is the need that you need right now? You need acceptance. You need approval. You need love. Well, you're not able to do that for yourself yet. And as the mother, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to show you right now. Because eventually I want you to learn that this is what you need to show to yourself. So that's what I'm going to show to myself. It's this need that's not being met right now. That's why I'm having all these thoughts and feelings come up and these habits that I'm finding myself get into. So sending love to that thing, accepting it, validating it, acknowledging that it's okay to be there, that you're allowed to be here. I'm not going to try to suppress you, repress you, avoid you. I've probably been doing that long enough and it's surfacing. I'm just going to show you acceptance, show that part of me acceptance. So it's one practice. Meditating is probably the best way, one of the best ways to get you out of the head thinking, the self-doubting, the fear-based thinking, the self-loathing, the self-hate, all the stuff that is in there, into a place where there is more love, peace, acceptance, approval. That's already within us. It's not outside of us. We don't need to wait for people to validate us. It's actually inside. So meditating for me is a way to get back into that space and then to bring it or send it into a situation that's upsetting me, or a thought that's upsetting me, or something that's disturbing my inner peace. People pray for that purpose as well. People chant mantra. People go into forests so that they can have more clear-headedness. Because when we're around, this is the other thing. Our ego is also made up of our conscious and unconscious. So most of what is in our awareness, most of what's in us is unknown. So a lot of the unconscious stuff, not from ourselves. It's from our educational background, from our parents, from society. So there's lots of these things infiltrating into our minds that didn't even come from us.
Yeah.
So in order for me to go, well, what is me and what is outside of me or what is belonging to other people, I need to get into a peaceful place so I can have a clear head and go, wow, this is who I actually am. I am actually a peaceful person who loves myself, acknowledges myself, respects myself, sees myself as good enough. Because the ego is constantly going to challenge us to feel good enough. It's going to say, you're not good enough yet. You need this to feel better. You need that to feel good. Who do you think you are? So the ego is constantly doing that. Or that's the tape recorder that the ego plays in order for us to fulfill its need to survive. So it's using a negative approach to get us to act in ways to maintain our survival, but maintain where we are. Whereas the soul is like, actually, there's this other way. So let's meditate and discover what that other way might be, what the solution might be, because it's not in the ego. The ego doesn't even know there's a soul. It's an aspect of ourselves that doesn't even communicate with the soul because it just sees itself as it. It is everything. It is the center of the universe. It is the sun.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're all amazing suggestions, and I personally find, if I go out into nature, I'm just a completely different person. I can really find calm, and it works for me. But, different things work for different people, and it also just depends how spiritually inclined someone is, and how far are they down the track of living in letting the ego rule their life, most of their life, and how much, catch-up work is there to actually do. So I think, obviously, it's going to vary from person to person. But if we took a different take on it and we didn't do it's hard to separate this, the spiritual self is part of us, even if we aren't specifically spiritual. We actually all are. Yeah. But for the people and the listeners who might go, meditation's just, not for me. Eventually, maybe I might try it. I don't know how. They just struggle. They're struggling with that idea of getting really into their own self and accessing all of that. Are there any other more maybe practically based tools or tips that you could offer for those people when they, obviously mindfulness is the recognition that that's happening. Yeah. But how to not push it away, still embrace it, but not let it run the show?
Yeah. So, first of all, someone would have to desire to connect more with their coach or inner mentor self more and have that aspect of themselves be the guide. We all have that guide inside of us, which I'm calling the soul. So, first of all, you need to have that desire. And that would mean that you want to take more responsibility for the actions the things you put out in the world. So unless you feel that way, then nothing I say is going to help anyone.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
so
I agree.
That's the number one thing. That you are kind of responsible for the life you create for yourself. Yes, there's circumstances that occur that make it hard for you to stay in control, but it's what you do with that. What are the opportunities there? How do you see that as a potential opportunity for your own growth and connection? Everyone's spiritual, but they may not think so. It's just, what do people connect with? Is it their footy team? Do they feel alive when they're at a game with a bunch of other people cheering for their team? That's, to me, a spiritual connection. When people are in a church or, a mosque or people in nature or gardeners or farmers, they're connecting to land, they're connecting to community, they're connecting to a God or whatever. It doesn't matter. That's still spiritual. So you don't have to consider yourself spiritual in order to want to connect with your guide self. So if you are interested in moving out of the ego-centered way of living in more of a soul-based or inner guide-based way, you have to look at what are the goals you were setting for yourself. Do you want to become a more compassionate person, a more kind person, loving person? So then you have to identify the quality you want to embody more. And then you set goals to get there. So it might mean you start showing more kindness to people when in the past you would have just, walked past them. So if you're like, okay, next time I see someone sitting on the street begging for money, in the past I might have just ignored them and walked by because I'm really uncomfortable seeing that. This time I'm going to stop and have a conversation with them and ask them what they need. Or, just chat, find out more about them. that in itself is a change towards a direction of connecting with someone.
Yeah.
And that's getting you more, and you feel good when you do that. If the exchange was positive. So that feeling of goodness, that's you getting into your soul self. And then when you can experience that more and more and more, you start to tap into more of that feeling in your everyday life in situations where it wouldn't have been there before. So it's doing something different that involves generosity, kindness, consideration from a genuine place. Not, I have to do this so that I'm not in my ego. That's egoic.
Yeah, so it's kind of like letting the soul do a little bit of course correction when the ego self is taking over a little bit. So it's like doing those little things that are soul-driven, that can help someone sort of veer back to a path which is more soul-driven.
Yeah, so the parts of the soul that is within everyone are things like empathy, compassion, perseverance, courage. So the more we can employ those virtues or qualities, that's us doing our soul's work. That's us being in our soul. So it's through, there's the inner kind of contemplative ways, and then there's the action-based ways. And I think we need both.
Yeah.
We can't just sit in a cave for 20 years and think that we can emerge and be these peaceful people, because the first encounter you'll have, someone will take you out of that peacefulness.
Yes.
And so how are you putting that into practice? How are you bringing that feeling and that love that you feel for humanity into humanity? So you need to think about the aspect you want to cultivate more for yourself. I'd like to be a kinder person, so now you have to start showing kindness.
Yeah. And I think it's also kindness to yourself, because that is also the idea. If you want to start showing kindness, as and really embracing that sort of quality, and yet when your ego is having a field day and you start berating it and getting angry at yourself and look at the sort of person I am, and I'm just horrible and all this sort of stuff, then you're not actually being kind to yourself. So that's probably starting to actually do, like you said before, and sending love to some of your behaviours.
Yeah. Or kindness or acceptance. So those are tolerance.
Yeah.
I may not love this aspect of myself, but I can tolerate it because clearly it's part of me and I can't reject that. It's in me. And I don't want to reject any aspect of myself because that's unhelpful. It's in me and I'd like to change it so that it's less like that and more like this other quality, this quality in my soul. So we need to have a goal. That helps to move us towards that direction.
Yeah.
And so sending kindness to our negative thoughts. Just letting them be there and just go, "Aw, darling, it's okay that you feel like that. It's fine. I still love you. I still think I'm a great person."
So talking to it like you would a child.
Yeah, or a friend.
Yeah.
What would you say to a friend when they were talking shit about themselves? When you see them as amazing and they just can't see that for themselves in the moment.
Yeah.
Do that for yourself too.
Yeah.
No different.
Which is a whole nother topic of self-love.
Yeah.
So maybe our next quarterly chat can be on self-love.
Yeah.
So going back to something you said earlier, and that was about the ego really coming into stepping, as more of the driver of ourself when we're in situations that are uncomfortable or that are uncertain. So do you think that another tool could be practicing situations or circumstances that are uncomfortable and getting to be comfortable with the uncomfortable?
Yeah. So, because in the end, we want a refined vehicle. We want a refined ego. So we might have, beat up 1972 Holden, and we actually want to be a Porsche. So that takes a lot of effort and constant monitoring of ourselves and action to support moving into the Porsche vehicle. We want it to be the servant. We don't want the ego to be the decision maker. And when I say that, we don't want our mind to be the thing that dictates our action, because our mind is often co-opted by the ego, or it is itself the ego coming out in our thoughts. Whereas the soul thoughts are, your love, everything is great, you have everything, you are everything. So we want that, guidance to be the thing that tells us what, this is the guidance for what's needed right now. And we have our skills and our capabilities to put that into action. So we want the ego to be responsive to that. We don't want it to dictate the actions that need to happen. But the ego starts to dictate when we're feeling threatened. And it just goes into reaction. It just goes into survival mode. So what we need is to change our instincts around that, because we have to move out of instant reaction into thoughtful response or conscious response. So in order to create a break between reaction and response, we have to put a break in it. And often the easiest thing that's used is just breathing.
Yeah.
Coming back to your breath and just noticing this urge, this kind of fired up passion inside, and just going, okay, we're just going to sit here a little longer before we do anything. And we're just going to breathe. And you breathe, for 3 breaths, not fast breaths, to slow down your breath. And then see what happens to that urge. And then go, and then take the next step. And it will be different than the reactive response.
Yeah. This takes me back to the conversation that we had last quarter about whether opinions matter. And we talked about people's reactions and people's responses and the difference between those. And I think that we even mentioned one of the tools that can be used is that pause, is that breath, is the pause before reacting. And then often what happens is you get more of a response than a reaction. When you stop, you pause and you breathe. So maybe that's the great tool.
Yeah.
That is something every single person, no matter how old they are, no matter what gender they are, no matter what belief systems, no matter what conditioning, everybody has breath.
Yeah.
And so that is a really good, simple tool that isn't as far as maybe, sitting and meditating, which is very breath-based as well, but it's a lot more difficult for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But
and that wouldn't be practical when you're in the moment.
That's exactly right.
Sorry,
I just need to go.
I'm feeling really angry. I need to go meditate right now. I'm pretty sure meditating isn't going to do anything.
That's right. So just stopping, pausing and taking a few breaths is a really good tool to use when you've come to the point of being mindful enough to recognise that the ego self is running the show and that you would like that not to be the case. So even if you don't know how to necessarily switch over, just to stop, pause, take a few breaths, and then see what happens from that place.
Yeah, because you know what's going to happen when you go into react mode. It's going to be ugly. It's never going to end well. There's just going to be combat. So if this has been the experience all along, why would it be any different this time around? So that's the desire. I want a different outcome. I want a different outcome than what I've been experiencing. So I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause and breathe. And what you're doing when you pause, you're actually employing patience, because you're willing to just take a step back for a few seconds before having to jump back into a situation. You're not letting the situation take over. You're not letting your ego kind of blindly take you down the path into, survive. You're a threat. I need to, win.
Yeah.
Because the ego is about me, mine, I, and the soul is about us and we.
Yes.
There is no me. It's we.
That's right.
We have to go, what is the best outcome for this scenario? What is the best outcome for this circumstance? And it might mean I don't get what I want. It means that I might be, not fulfilling my own expectation. I just need to adjust my expectation. My expectation was wrong. But the ego is all about right versus wrong, whereas the soul is like, it's all good. It's all good. It all has a purpose. It all is necessary.
Yeah.
The soul can see objectively what's going on in a situation where the ego can't. It just sees me, mine. I'm the sun. I'm the center of everything. I need to get my needs met right now.
Yeah.
Now.
And that brings me to something one of my past guests had really highlighted for me when we were talking about, waking up to wellness and the difference between illness and wellness, and illness having an I for I and wellness having a we.
That's right.
And so that's kind of the same thing. Illness is all about me and, how do I survive and how do I get through this and how do I not die?
Yeah.
Or how do I get better?
Yeah.
I. And wellness is about how to, what do we need to do in order to...
Yeah. Which is why when
well.
you're ill, you go see a doctor. You get support from health professionals. whether it's doctor or whoever, that it becomes about we. You can't do this on your own. You need someone else to help you through it.
Yeah.
And having that intention that, I'm actually surrendering my vulnerability, all these issues that I have about showing vulnerability, so that I receive the help that I need, then that's me being in my soul as well. That's me being guided by my soul. So the other thing, the ego is very good at is about taking mine. What's yours is mine. What's mine is mine. What's ours is mine. Whereas the soul is about this generosity, but it's also good at receiving.
Yeah.
It's also good at receiving. And that's another thing. The aspect of ourselves that says that we're never good enough and that we feel a lot of shame about who we are right now, that blocks us from receiving, which is very unwise. We see giving to others as a good thing, but people also want to give to us. And a lot of the time we're like, no, don't give that to me. No, that's not necessary. Let me pay for that. Let me do that. Because we have this idea that it's not a good thing and we always need to give. But people can't be generous with us when we're not willing to receive from them. So that's also a way the ego aspect can sabotage that for us.
Yeah, so it disrupts the flow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Another thing that I thought of when you were talking about, when we were talking about the pause and the breath, is another way to maybe that people can identify that the ego is at, main play here, is even just noticing the body. And is the body leaning in and continuously, it's almost in that reactive lean-in mode? Because when you said the word patience and breathing and patience, I also thought, all right, well, what's the body doing?
Yeah.
And if we can even take note, not just of what our mind's doing and the thought patterns that are happening, but take note of what is the body showing you. Are the shoulders relaxed? Is the chest open, or is it in a contracted state? Are you leaning forward or are you leaning back? And so maybe another thing that can be done in that situation is, yes, coming to the breath, pausing and coming to the breath, but also changing the way that the body is behaving. So, relaxing the shoulders, starting
clenching,
to lean back, opening and expanding.
Yeah.
Because when we're in that position, one, we're in a better position to receive, a better position to give, and we're just more open for response rather than reaction.
Yeah, because our body language can be perceived as threatening if we feel threatened.
Yeah.
Because we're defensive.
That's right.
We need to fight back, or we don't need to fight back, but that's the ego-based response. So I find sometimes when people are locked in debate or there's some conflict, just changing your gaze. You might be locked eye to eye. If you shift your focus to something else, then that's already changing the energy between you two in the situation, so that you can kind of step out of that lock. Because you get locked. It's almost like you're bound together by some rage, and you need a way to kind of unbind yourself. So, like what you said, changing your body language, but even just turning your head to look at something else is a way to do it.
Yeah.
Just changing something about your posture, your breath, stepping back a bit. Yeah. Especially when there's a situation where you're feeling bullied, or you might be the bully, because you're feeling threatened, and you're wanting to have your needs met. That's all it is. And you've gotten away with it before, so you're likely to do it again as a way to get your needs met.
Yeah.
And nobody's called you on it. So if you're noticing that part of that's what's playing out for you, you need to just kind of take a step back, breathe, move your head, anything that unlocks you from that position. So you get out of bully mode into more patient mode, or more sensible mode.
Okay, so say you are that person and your needs aren't being met, and this has worked for you in the past because, like you said, someone didn't pull you up on it, but then you continue to behave in that way, but then you do get pulled up on it, and that doesn't feel comfortable or good.
Nope.
So that actually puts you in a position that there's a chance there that the ego will play out even further because you're feeling under threat even more and uncomfortable even more. So that could just spiral into, real conflict or not a desirable outcome.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that situation?
I just don't think you're in your body at all. You're completely dissociated from any rationality. So there's people who have experienced trauma in their life, and so they haven't yet developed the way to go into this soul-centered approach because they're in pure survival mode when they get triggered in a certain way. So it's kind of like they leave their body. They just exit their senses, and something else takes over them, and they just go into that rage. And there's no way for anyone to go, oh, I'm noticing myself in rage right now, and I really don't like that. I don't think this is really useful, so I'm going to just pull myself back. No, it's not going to happen. So
in a situation like that, because that situation does happen a lot. I mean, everybody's got their own baggage, and a lot of people have got carry a lot of trauma, some of their own and some of other people's and generations and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
I mean, that's happening every day, all the time, whether it be in work circumstances, in personal circumstances, in different dynamics and different ways of relating. That happens all the time when there's actually a whole lot of trauma held within the body for somebody. And so, they are continuously in reaction mode and continuously in that position. So is there light for those people?
Definitely, but they have to want to change.
And if they do?
Then they're, again, employing some of these tactics, and I would recommend that they don't try these things on their own, that they get coaches for this sort of thing, right? Or they work with therapists to help them get to where they want to be. So when they're in a situation, they no longer get triggered by certain things that would have bothered them in the past. And trigger meaning they go into a trauma response.
Yeah. So in your experience, because I know you've got experience with working with people with trauma, so
we all have trauma.
Yeah.
I have experience working with
we all have it. But people that are particularly holding a lot of, making behavioural choices based on maybe bigger trauma than the everyday trauma. And I know that doesn't, let's just leave, without overcomplicating it.
Yeah.
Right? So, there's a lot of different avenues. There are some people that obviously go the cognitive psychology avenue, some people that go more healing-based, body-based work. There's all different ways, obviously, that you can work with a therapist or a coach or a mentor or whoever around trauma. So in your personal experience, what have you seen what has been one of the more successful ways that have helped people in those situations?
So when the successful ways is that a person who is with them recognizes that person is going into a trauma response and can work, relate to them in a trauma responsive way. So that is the way you help bring someone back into regulation when they've been triggered into a state of rage or passivity or, the different ways that it expresses itself. It takes another person who can recognize that and help them come back into a comfortable place. Now, for themselves, if they want to change, if they want to no longer be held hostage by their past, then, there's all sorts of therapy. For people who've experienced trauma and have post-traumatic stress disorder, I find art therapy to be phenomenal because what happens is that because the ego is so strong, it can be the driver of a car or of itself as the car. It just takes over and it takes all the emotions that are felt, it just kind of pushes them to the side. And so the person becomes very disconnected from their feeling nature and they go into rational thought whenever they're trying to make decisions or whenever there's something going on. They're going into their thinking mode as that's the way they survive. So art therapy and other similar types of therapy help people connect to their emotional nature and start to speak to that again because they're disconnected. And so then the emotional self for me, is the way my soul communicates with my body. And so in order for me to understand what my needs are, I need to feel into what's going on for me. And for people who can't do that because the feeling is so big for them, it's scary, they need ways to approach their feeling, to face their feeling or encounter them again, and to sit with it, and to learn how to not be fearful by it and not let it take it over them, and that they drown in it. So I think art therapy is like the safest and a really effective way for people to start to connect with that part of themselves, so that that part communicates with their ego, with their mind, so that they can start to have different perceptions of their situation, rather than seeing it as threatening, as, oh, they just mean this, or they just want this, or this is what I need here.
Yeah.
They bring more rational kind of thinking, as well as more peace-based responsiveness. So that's a huge process. It won't happen overnight. It takes years of work and dedication, but there is a light for, most people. They just might take time to find the right person to work with them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. So I just want to quickly touch on, we'll wind up in a minute, but I just want to really touch on when you just said before about when somebody is triggered in a situation. So there's a conflict, it's bringing out conflict, and it's for that other person within that situation to be able to recognise that that person is having a trauma-based response or trauma-based reaction.
Yeah.
And that they need to respond with an understanding that that's happening. Are there any, obviously, there's a whole lot of skill involved in being able to do that. But if we were to simplify it, are there any simple tools that you could suggest that could help that person in that situation? Because it's not, it's going to be the everyday person. It could be dealing with their partner. It could be dealing with their child. It could be dealing with their work colleague. It could be dealing with a whole lot of people in that situation. And they recognise that that person is somewhat out of their body and having a trauma-based reaction. So what are some of the things that you could say, a person could say in that situation when that's what they're dealing with, without heightening the situation by saying the wrong thing?
Yeah. Like I said before, our ego is all about meeting our needs, having my survival needs met. So I have to think, if I'm with a person who is reacting to something going on, either something I said or whatever the situation is, I need to first be in my heart and not chuck my judgment like, oh, look at this irrational, horrific behavior. That's the wrong thing to go. You go into your heart and you're like, I need to create a space where they feel safe to go there, to unload in this way because it's happening, and I'm not here to stop it. I'm here to be accepting of it and see what, move us into a different place together. So the first thing I go is, what is important to this person? What need is like screaming out right now that is not being met for them? And I have to help them meet it, or I have to create the circumstances where that need could be met. So, for example, someone could feel like they've been judged harshly, or they've just, they've been disapproved of. So I need to show approval for where they are right now, what they're showing. So sometimes people, we have these things all the time that we're talking to someone and suddenly they just get really upset by something we just said. Where to us it felt really benign. Like, I can't believe they're getting so upset about me being late for, our appointment. But to them, being on time is important for whatever reason. So I need to acknowledge, yes, it is important to be on time. And if I say, if we agree that I'm going to be here at this time, then I should be here at this time. And if I'm not here, then I'm at fault and I'm so sorry. So I need to give them that they were right, that they fulfilled their end of the bargain and I didn't. And I need to apologize because being on time is value for them. It's important to them.
So you've almost got to
second.
You've almost got to, within a second, be able to predict what their values are.
Well, they're telling you. They're telling you because they're upset about something. They're actually sharing with you what their value is.
Yeah. So the emotions
you just have to be able
really
to feel it.
Yeah. So the emotions are the data.
Yeah.
Which are giving you the information to be able to understand what their values are.
Yeah, that's right. So it comes out in their words, and you just have to be curious about what they're saying instead of going, I can't believe that they're getting upset about that. That's the worst thing to do, and that's not going to de-escalate a situation.
And so, but is there a fine line here between what responsibility you have to meet their needs and what responsibility they have to meet their own needs. Like, I mean, is it your responsibility in that situation to meet their needs, or is that you just trying to meet their needs so that you don't escalate a confrontation?
Well, it depends on the role I'm playing. So if I'm a teacher, if I'm a therapist, if I'm a coach, if I'm in a situation where they're coming to me for something, then I'm not meeting their need for validation, but I'm validating them because we all need validation.
Yes. What if you're not? What if you're like a colleague or a partner or a friend?
Well, so we have to understand so it's not only about what's important to them, but it's a desire to connect with them. Yes. So that's us going into our soul space and going, how do we get into this we?
Yes.
Instead of me versus them versus me, I versus I, because that's not going to take us anywhere.
Love it.
So what is important to them and how do I connect with them? And we connect with our being, our body language, our energy that we put in. So we have to kind of exude love and acceptance, which means we have to know how to practice how to do that in the first place so that when the situation calls for it, we can get in there. We can go straight into a loving place without being patronizing, without being like, oh, darling, that's not it. But that we are showing understanding and an openness to receive whatever they're unloading.
So it becomes authentic, not pity-based.
Yeah, but it's also not taking shit from anyone in the way that they're going to start, hurting us or verbally abusing us. That takes a different skill set to not take anything personally, which is hard because your ego is going to get... your ego is going to arc up and be like, I'm trying to help you. How dare you speak to me like that? We go back into our I. So it's like, how do I stay in we? How do I stay connected to this person? How do I get connected to this person? And how do I remain connected? And that requires empathy. You need to be able to read people to know what they need. It's not just the words, it's the feeling. And the only way you do that is the desire to connect. You need that.
I love that this whole conversation has continued to come back to the notion of connection, because how much I believe that connection is medicine, and I make it my work to help people to connect to themselves, others, and the world around them, and it really is the crux of everything. It really is. And
so if we see people who are acting like assholes, we can go, what an asshole, or we can go, what's going on for them? What's going on that they feel like this is how they need to be to have their needs met? Mm-hmm. And if the situation calls for it, maybe it's an opportunity for us to connect with them, because acting in that way is a way of being isolated, is isolating oneself from the rest of a group. So for us to be able to be of benefit to the world, where we help create connection, we have to be the connector sometimes. And sometimes we feel, well, it's not my job, but it's like, actually it is.
It's all about
It's all of our job. It's my responsibility. If I want to be in a workplace that's harmonious and I'm seeing disharmony, do I wait for someone to solve that problem, or do I... And it's not even a problem. It's just not the ideal environment for me, and I enjoy connection. Everyone enjoys feeling connected. And there's this person isolating themselves. So it's my role, my duty, a responsibility that I would choose to take on to kind of bring them in, to include them.
Yeah.
Because their ego is telling them, it's sabotaging the situation for them. And they're either clueless about it, or they hate them, or they're in a self-hate, self-loathing that they continue to perpetuate that behavior. So connection is medicine, as you say.
Yeah. I love these conversations, Nat. I love where we go when we don't even know where we're going to go, and there always ends up being a whole lot of wisdom pulled out of it. So thank you so much for coming today and, giving me your time and the audience your time to have these chats. Is there anything that I haven't covered or that we haven't covered that you want to share?
I can't think of anything. I think I've said enough.
Well, thank you again. Awesome. If there is any questions that anybody has, anything that we've covered that you agree or you disagree with that you want to explore further, please do reach out. You can, and we will, get back to you. You can contact me on my Facebook page on Wealthy Living, WELLTHY Living, or you can find me at www.wealthyliving.com.au. I can put you in touch with Nat as well, and all of her details will be on the show notes as well. So thank you, everyone. I'm Lisa Entwistle, your host and founder of Wealthy Living. I'm an integrated life clarity and wellbeing coach. I do workplace wellness, event facilitation and hosting. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do leave a comment. Go to iTunes, rate the show so more people can experience it, hear the wisdom, and share with your networks if you feel inclined. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in.